Hello, my name is Amy Klco, and today I'm going to be reading my story. It was published in Literature Today, Volume 11, which was all about the pandemic. And my story is called What Was Learned in Isolation. February 8th, 2070. Dear Grandma Beatrice, this is your granddaughter, Emmy Lou. I never got to meet you in person. You left this world before I was even born. Still, I want you to know that I will never forget what you, and others like you, did for me and for everyone. I am just about to complete my Tier 3 schooling. I guess you would have called it high school. And I'm excited to go to Tier 4 so that I can really focus on my career goals. But before I can do that, I have to complete my final project to prove my competencies for graduation. And for my History English section, I am required to research a significant, life-altering time in history. I decided to go back and look into the time of COVID-19. As with anything that happened so long ago, 50 years? It's hard to find much information. Harder still to imagine what it must have been like to live through it. Was it scary, Grandma, when things started closing down? When it seemed that the life you had known would change forever? Well, I'm here to tell you that it did change, but in so many wonderful ways. Thanks to people like you, who didn't let fear overtake them. My research tells me that there was a lot of fear during this time, and a lot of disagreements. But of course, that's a sterile description. It doesn't help me to really understand what you felt like, living in uncertainty. I can only imagine how it must have felt the day you and Grandpa had to close the greenhouse to customers for an unknown period of time. Would the lockdown last a month? 2? All summer? Or even longer? And when things were finally lifted, when people were able to go out in public once again, what would have become of the place you'd worked for years to build and keep running, despite the ever-growing trend towards shopping at the big Universal stores that were so popular at the time? You didn't know then that once the quarantine was lifted, people would go out of their way to shop the small mom-and-pop shops to help them stay in business. It must have been frightening living with such an unknown future. Well, let me tell you what happened. Some of this, of course, you already know. But as for the rest, the first thing that the pandemic did was give people time to think. While some doctors and nurses and grocery store employees were working around the clock to keep things going, many suddenly found themselves at home with nothing to do. Or I should say, with nothing they felt they had to do. Instead, they could decide what they wanted to do. They suddenly had a chance to decide what really mattered to them. And here's what many people discovered was really important: connections. Being disconnected physically helped people to see the importance of emotional connections. Parents spent time, real quality time, with their children. Many couples rekindled or reconnected their love for each other. Did you and Grandpa? People took the time to reach out to others in any way they could. Video conferencing really took off during that time, I'm told. Suddenly, everyone wanted to talk with friends and family. Schools went online too, it says, without warning and with various levels of success. But this would pave the way for what would become the blended schooling that I've been lucky enough to experience, with some topics like math, science, and history English taught virtually, and others, like the acting class I love so much, done in person. I love virtual learning because it allows me to move at my own pace and go into depth into the topics that really interest me, as I'm doing right now with this research paper. But I also love hanging out with my friends, learning about the various aspects of acting. This is not what really changed the world, though. What really changed the world was when people decided to take back control of the government. The disease and the quarantine it caused helped bring to light what was important and what the government should provide for its people. What was not important was helping rich billionaires become richer. What was important was providing every citizen with an equal chance for life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. I just love how this old phrase was brought back and redefined during this time in history. This was the moment when people were really able to see that in order for everyone to have a chance in life, certain things were needed. A guaranteed base income for everyone, so no one had to fear being without the basic necessities, such as food and shelter. equal access to quality education from ages 2 through 22, 2 to 22 we call it. Internet for all, so children could get that education, adults could work remotely, and everyone had equal access to information. Healthcare for all. That access to healthcare for all was a huge turning point in everything. In my research, it says that before this time, healthcare was broken up into 2 separate categories, physical health and mental health. I have to tell you, Grandma, I'm trying to wrap my head around that concept, but it just doesn't make sense to me. As everyone knows, our physical and mental health are so tied together that anything you're struggling with emotionally will show up as a physical symptom. I just can't see how doctors could treat one aspect without considering the other. But they must have. Because one source I looked at says the entire healthcare industry changed once they started to consider how mental and physical health interacted. History of America, 485. I could have told them that. All these things changed our world so much, but I have saved the biggest, and in my mind the most important change, for last. People started going outside again. With their schedules freed up, they had time to do that. And once they did, they remembered how much they loved nature. And some of them learned it for the first time. They realized how healing it was. And they realized it was time to focus on healing it. But I don't have to tell you about this, do I, Grandma Beatrice? Or should I call you by your nickname, Grandma B? You weren't even a grandmother yet. You were still pregnant with my mom when this all began. But this is when you took up the role as a pollinator for both plants and ideas. You turned your greenhouse into a base of operations where you dispersed information on growing home gardens, sustainable living, foraging, and environmental activism. It was a one-stop shop for all things nature. You helped people learn to break free from their reliance on grocery stores for all their food, as well as how to let the government know what really mattered to them: clean energy. As strange it is for me to imagine a healthcare system that didn't consider emotional health, the hardest thing for me to imagine is a world where everything ran on gasoline. I've seen pictures of that time, the smog that used to cover your cities, and I just can't imagine living like that. I am so proud of you, Grandma, for fighting against that way of life. The timing was perfect. With so many at home during the quarantine, many discovered that they could do their jobs remotely, and that they preferred to do it this way. Even when the quarantine was lifted, they fought to stay home. The long commutes and busy traffic just didn't seem worth it for them anymore, now that they knew there was another option. And if they could do their work from home, that meant their home could be anywhere. They didn't have to live close to the big cities anymore. They could have that piece of land out in the country where they could grow their gardens, get in touch with nature, and keep their jobs, if they wanted to. With the guaranteed income, many chose to leave the jobs they hated for something that was more meaningful to them. Which is what led to the Great Migration away from the cities and back out into the country, back to the land. All of this allowed people, not just across the country, but across the world, to stage the biggest protest in history. I just love this part. The car boycotts. People across the world just stopped driving. They parked their cars and told the car companies, "We are not driving anymore until you find a new, environmentally healthy way to power these devices." The Great Car Boycott, 286. And they kept to their word until the car companies had no choice but to scramble to find new ways to power their vehicles. As one article said, it was amazing how quickly companies were able to find alternative solutions once they were forced into it. How car companies were forced to change, 493. It was almost like they had the solution all along. They were just weren't going to do anything until people made them. Thank you, Grandma B, for being one of those people that made them change. But I guess you got your own reward for this, didn't you? You and Grandpa? Because once they really started to explore alternative energy sources, that's when everything really took off, including space exploration. These new clean forms of energy made it possible and practical to build a moon colony. And when they did, and it was time to look into terraforming that colony, Well, they needed an expert on all things nature, and guess who that was? My own Grandma Bee. I'm almost finished with my research into the time of COVID-19, but there's still one thing I need. My teacher wants me to include a primary source, to hear from someone who actually lived through the experience, and I can't think of anyone better to hear from. And so, I am sending this letter off to the moon, to a grandmother I've never met in person, but have always admired. I would love to hear from you, Grandma Bee. What can you tell me about what it was like to live during such a powerful time of change? How did you get the courage to stand up to the government and the big oil companies? And what words of wisdom do you have to help your granddaughter follow in your footsteps? Maybe someday I will come up to the moon to visit you. I would love that. Until then, I hope you know just how much I admire you. I will always look up to you. Sorry about the pun, but I just couldn't help myself. Your granddaughter, Amy Lou.